Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Top Fundraising Trends to Capitalize on in 2021. For those of you who are returning Candid webinar participants, a warm welcome back. And to those of you who are here for the first time, I'm so glad that you're joining us today. My name is Elizabeth Cevada, and I'm a program manager for Candid based in our New York Learning Center. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Yvonne, who's based in Atlanta. Together, we'll be supporting today's webinar behind the scenes by collecting questions that you ask along the way and posing those during our Q&A. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, we want to share with you that we've joined forces with GuideStar and Foundation Center to form a new single organization called Candid. Together, we have over 88 years of expertise in the nonprofit sector. Every year, millions of nonprofits spend trillions of dollars around the world. Candid finds out where that money comes from, where it goes, and why it matters. And we do this through research, collaboration, and training. Candid connects people who want to change the world with the resources that they need to do it. I'd also like to pause and take a moment to say thank you. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us today, for making time for learning and seeing what new trends our partners have to share with us today. But we know that these are trying times for everyone, and carving time to attend something live or even watch a recording can definitely be a new pressure that we hadn't had to face before. So thank you for joining us. In addition, Candid has been providing a variety of resources for the sector, both to address COVID-19 as well as the various racial equity issues that our sector has had to face. And we do encourage you to stay up to date with all of the additional resources that we are putting out for the sector, both nonprofits and foundations alike, by subscribing to our Candid Learning newsletter. And of course, you can always follow us on social media. So without further ado, I'd like to hand things over to our presenters, Carly and Elizabeth from Classy, who are going to walk us through some of the trends that they've identified for this coming year. So I'm going to go ahead and hand over the presentation to Elizabeth and invite both Carly and herself to introduce themselves.
Good morning. Thank you, Elizabeth. I am Elizabeth. It's nice to meet all of you. I hope you can all see my screen. Really quickly, just going to run through the agenda today, introduce myself, and then pass things off to my colleague, Carly, and she's going to take us through the first two sections of the webinar today. But we're really excited to be here, excited to talk about our fundraising trends for 2021. I think this is a very timely session since I assume most of you are kind of in the annual planning process. So we're going to kick things off by first talking about the importance of virtual events, why they're here to stay. Then we'll talk about how you can, different ways in which you can meet your supporters on their turf. I'll be speaking personally about recurring giving, why it's going to be more important than ever before. And then we'll kind of round out the webinar by talking about ways in which you can remain nimble in times of uncertainty. Again, another very timely topic for all of us here. And then again, we'll wrap up with Q&A. As Elizabeth shared, we want this to be an interactive session. So ask any questions that you may have of us. We have a good, decent chunk of time allotted at the end to go through Q&A. I'm so eager to answer any questions that you may have. So without further ado, I'll pass things off to Carly, and I hope you guys all enjoy today's session.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Hi, everyone. My name's Carly Forster. I'm so excited to be here with you today, calling in from San Diego over here at Classy headquarters. And I'm going to be kicking off our webinar by discussing the importance of virtual events and why they're here to stay. So one of the biggest impacts of this COVID-19 pandemic on the nonprofit industry was the cancellation of in-person fundraising events. That's probably something that's very familiar to a lot of us on the call. In response, we saw an explosion in the number of events that had to make that pivot from in-person to fully virtual. And many of those virtual events were born from what I like to call this spirit of innovation and resiliency from organizations that were forced to evolve in sometimes a literal matter of days and raise those much needed funds in completely new ways. So on the next few slides, I'm going to dive into why virtual events are an integral part of your fundraising strategy and ultimately why they're here to stay. So the first question to consider here is, how did the COVID-19 pandemic impact in-person fundraising events? We're going to start from the ground up and figure this out together. Well, it probably comes to no one's surprise on the call here that the answer to this question is events were impacted drastically. With such an immediate and total shift from physical to virtual fundraising events, organizations have been forced to think creatively and really outside of the box to continue maximizing fundraising reach and impact at this time. One key thing we've learned this last year is that the social sector should not focus on a return to this quote unquote normal after the pandemic. Instead, the industry really needs to focus on how to work through the challenges faced and adapt to the ways it's changed the fundraising landscape altogether. Now, a big piece of this is going to include embracing the new ideas that have been presented over this last year, and that's going to include this virtual events movement. So we're reimagining things like galas, walk runs, biking events, luncheons, all with an online emphasis, as well as adding in new events like virtual dinners, social hours. I've even seen some really cool gaming nights. You can get very creative here. And there are so many different ways to approach this new online virtual event trend, which we'll be discussing in the next few slides, starting with a really amazing example that I always love to share about how a Classy client successfully made that decision to pivot from an in-person gala to a virtual event in the matter of 1 week, and why virtual events will ultimately remain a part of their evergreen fundraising strategy. So for my first example here, like I said, this is a story I absolutely love to share. It's about one of our incredible nonprofit clients, Upaya Social Ventures. And to give you a little bit of background, this is an organization with a mission to fight extreme poverty from the ground up. So just by nature of their mission, you can already tell they are doing some incredible work. And why I'm so excited to share this story is it's just one of many amazing organizations who successfully pivoted their in-person event to a virtual one this past year. So to set the stage, this story begins in March 2020 when Upaya was set to host their annual gala, which is the biggest fundraiser of the year that they count on for about a quarter of their operating budget. With just a few days left until their huge upcoming gala, our world absolutely shifted as we all knew it with this full shelter-in-place protocol. I'm sure we're all recalling what was going on at the time, meaning that Upaya had less than 1 week to shift from an in-person gala to a virtual event. With a bit of that quick thinking and creativity I mentioned earlier, they were able to transition to a fully virtual event and ended up raising 142% of their $200,000 goal, which was $283,000. For anyone who's in the events world, considering that events typically have a 12-month planning cycle, this is a huge deal to have flipped this around in the matter of 1 week. And I also want to call out something special here, that virtual events can translate beyond what we traditionally think as these tickets for purchase strategies. And this is what I mean by thinking creatively. So this event for Upaya was actually transitioned over to a peer-to-peer fundraising campaign where they converted their former table sponsors from the event, so those hosts, those captains of those tables, into peer-to-peer fundraisers. So what happened was these former table sponsors, now fundraising captains, whose initial goals were to invite people simply to join the event and then donate during the gala, well, they were now able to augment their efforts on a much larger scale by creating personal fundraising pages and appealing to their networks online. So with the right tools at hand via their individual and team fundraising pages, these passionate advocates for Upaya were now able to activate their full social networks to become donors and supporters, which ultimately helped Upaya to exceed their fundraising goals. And the great part of this story is, I'm going to keep reiterating this, Upaya is not alone in making this successful transition. Many other organizations have made the switch to virtual events this year and have seen really great success in doing so. Another example here that comes to mind is from our Classy client, To Write Love on Her Arms. And again, a little background, this is an amazing movement dedicated to presenting hope and finding help for people. So they hosted their Run For It virtual 5K on Classy, which brought together their community for a virtual run to raise funds for their mental health support programs, and ultimately raised 120% of their $85,000 goal. So let's dive in a bit deeper and figure out the key parts of this strategy. Well, one key element of virtual events like this is increasing communication with fundraisers around logistics, instructions, coaching, and encouragement. So communicating out a toolkit for success can help guide virtual event goers to reach their fundraising goals and secure more funding back for the organization. Taking that a step further, on top of those coaching and communication elements, we also know that competition can be really motivating, especially when we're talking about 5Ks, 10Ks, walks, bikes, runs, any of those sort of naturally competitive events. And I can personally attest to this as a former collegiate athlete. Competition is a huge driving force for me, especially when it comes to fundraising opportunities. There are multiple ways that you can infuse that bit of friendly competition into virtual events like this, replicating what a participant might feel when they're actually in person at an event. So a couple of examples that came to mind that I've seen have great success would be leaderboards to spotlight top individuals and fundraisers and top teams, automated milestone emails that send out to congratulate success when people hit certain milestones, and also encourage people to keep reaching for that top spot. You can advertise and offer prizes to top fundraisers on your event site, and you can even recreate a race day atmosphere by adding in a Strava plugin to your Classy event page and empower your participants to share their race times with the full community. So again, there are a lot of ways to infuse that bit of friendly competition and ultimately end up raising more back for the organization. And my final example for this is one that actually hits really close to home for our Classy team. So we have this annual event we host every year called The Collaborative, which is a nonprofit conference designed to improve collaboration, encourage meaningful connections within the industry, and empower organizations to accelerate and maximize their impact. It's a really incredible conference. And the past 6 collaborative events we've hosted have brought together nonprofit professionals, social entrepreneurs, cause experts, and industry leaders to take part in these really game-changing discussions. So this year, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit the US, literally just 3 months before we were set to deliver the opening keynote in Boston, it forced our team to stop, take a step back, and really think, what does this mean for the 2020 Collaborative? And even more importantly, what does this mean for the connections that are usually made between participants in Boston? And we decided it meant we now had the opportunity to share that collaborative experience, the learnings, the networking, and the social sharing that happens in that space with thousands more nonprofit professionals by taking our event virtual. We ended up drawing in over 10,000 attendees from 710 cities and 13 countries, making this year's collaborative one of the most impactful yet. And what was even more impactful, what I love to share, was the fact that all of these amazing resources were made available to anyone during and post-event via our collaborative virtual sessions site. So anyone is able to access the recordings, any of the live presentations, and basically have that same in-person experience, but now from a virtual setting. And as I mentioned in the intro to this entire section, we are recognizing the incredible benefits of adapting to a virtual world, which for our team at Classy means that for our upcoming collaborative, June 8th through the 11th, it's once again going to be a virtual experience to make those learnings and networking as accessible as possible to individuals across the social sector, and we hope you'll join us. So with all of those examples and countless more here, we believe that virtual events trend is here to stay. And if anything, it's only going to grow in popularity because it allows nonprofits to do a few things. First, they'll free themselves from geographic limitations and engage with new attendees, new speakers, new sponsors for your events, because you no longer have people having to fly in, to drive in, to get to the location of your event. You can truly engage with the entire worldwide audience. Second, it lowers the barrier to entry for participants. So people are requesting less time off. There's no flights involved, no hotel bookings, no logistics. So virtual events are, again, far more accessible for a wider audience. Third, you'll be able to reduce some of the major events cost, like venues. And lastly, it gives you the opportunity to easily steward relationships with attendees, fundraisers, and donors to build future engagement opportunities. So with all of this said, to wrap up this section, if you have been challenged with taking an in-person event virtual and don't know where to turn, the Classy team here has you covered. We've put together a virtual events toolkit that will give you access to popular types of virtual fundraising events. It'll run through the anatomy of a standout virtual event. It'll provide you with email and social media marketing best practices and integrations to maximize your fundraising potential. Many of those I've hit on through this presentation, and they are going to be recapped during that virtual events toolkit. We'll also share with you some of our favorite examples of successful virtual events to help inspire you. So we'll share out the link in a follow-up email. Keep your eyes peeled, and we hope that it helps out with your 2021 planning. All right, so on to the second topic of today of these trends is how do you meet your supporters on their turf? It has always been so important to proactively engage with donors where they spend their time. But with this move to a more virtual world in 2020, it really underscores the need to double down on your efforts and meet supporters in places where they spend the most time, which is online, or as I like to say, the interwebs. So in the next few slides, we'll dig through some tips and best practices for how to engage your donors. Through this section, we're going to cover a few ways to engage with your supporters based on where they may spend their most time, which includes strengthening your social presence, exploring live streaming options, and leveraging relationships with social media influencers. To start, a great way to engage with your donors is to strengthen your social presence on established platforms like Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. We're all pretty familiar with those, while also initiating a presence on new platforms like TikTok. Yes, TikTok, it's the way of the future, and I know that might sound as a really strange way to connect with donors, but consider the fact that there are over 1 billion active monthly users on TikTok now, which is the same as Instagram. That is a huge audience to tap into for potential fundraisers, donors, and supporters. So consider some ways to curate your brand and message to adapt to this new market of virtual engagement with potential supporters. Live streaming on that second bullet there is also a really interesting area to explore in 2021, given the trends that we saw this year. Engaging supporters through live video allows for new sources of revenue and engagement for nonprofits. When you live stream content, it provides a really simple way for supporters to feel intimately connected to the impact of your organization. It's almost as if you're reaching across the screen and having that in-person one-on-one conversation via live stream. You can use platforms like Twitch, Facebook Live, and YouTube Live to live stream that content. And lastly, for our final bullet here, you can leverage relationships with social media influencers to gain access to their widespread network of followers and build new donor relationships. I have a really great example from a campaign that I'm going to walk you through about just that in just a moment, but let's go ahead and start with live streaming. So first question here, why explore live streaming as a way to connect with donors? What's the data to back this up? Well, the reach and personalization you have with live streaming is truly unlike any other platform. A few statistics to consider here are that in 2019 alone, people watched 1.1 billion hours of live video. And it's been reported that 82% of people prefer live video from a brand over standard social media posts. You can embed live video from YouTube, Twitch, or Vimeo on your Classy event page to create connections between your organization and supporters. If you're able to add a video message from your organization's founder, your CEO, your executive director, or even from one of your beneficiaries, this can be a really great way to recreate the atmosphere of that in-person event. And through the next slides, I have a few examples lined up for us here of Classy clients that found unique ways to engage with their supporters using live stream video. My first example is going to come from Cleveland Clinic, an amazing organization, and their annual fundraising campaign benefiting cancer research called Velosano typically features their flagship Bike to Cure weekend to set the stage here. This is a large-scale cycling event that takes place each July. As you can imagine, there's typically a lot of excitement during the kickoff when it's in person, with participants really ready to kick things into high gear. So with the switch to the virtual world, the Cleveland Clinic team recognized the importance of a live stream kickoff party, which allowed them to engage with their supporters at home while still maintaining that excitement and engagement of a typical event kickoff weekend and maintain that same excitement level throughout the year-long campaign. So again, to reiterate here, the live streamed video allowed them to reach across the screen to their participants, really build excitement, hype up the event, and ultimately kick things off in really spectacular fashion. My next example comes from St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, probably a very familiar name. This is an organization leading the way the world understands, treats, and defeats childhood cancer and other life-threatening diseases. So again, another amazing mission. And St. Jude, what I love about this example is they used influencer marketing to engage with supporters by building a relationship with the online influencer, Dr. Lupo, who leveraged his 3.6 million followers on a Twitch live stream to raise over $3 million for the organization. This was a huge milestone for St. Jude, and one that was truly only made possible by tapping into the network of that partner influencer, Dr. Lupo. Now, I'm sure many of you already have questions in your mind of how to identify and partner with social influencers. So how do you find these people and actually bring them in to support your organization? I have a few quick tips I'm going to share, and then we're going to link out a resource in our follow-up email from the Classy blog on how to partner with social influencers. So the first thing to keep in mind is that there may actually already be a few digital micro-influencers interested in your nonprofit's work already. Who knows? They might be in your donor pool, they might be counted amongst your supporters. So to discover potential partners, you can use programs online like SocialRank to see which members of your community have large followings. And one thing to keep in mind here is that it is so much more powerful to have an influencer partner that is passionate about your work than just flash in the pan activism. And what I mean by that is with someone with a following of 10,000 people who knows and loves your work is so much more valuable than someone with, say, 50,000 followers who isn't a true advocate for your cause. So take some time to really get to know some of those supporters with large followings and see who those passionate advocates and influencers could be for your organization. You can also identify potential influencer partners by reviewing hashtags on Twitter and Instagram. So find a hashtag that relates to the focus of what your organization does. And pay attention to the posts that have a lot of engagement to identify those potential partners. A post with a lot of interaction, a lot of likes, a lot of comments is most likely by someone who has a large active following. As far as how to connect and engage with these influencers, there are a variety of ways to build those relationships. And honestly, it can be really similar to how you might currently approach sponsorship opportunities or maybe your relationships with major givers. So a couple of ideas: consider adding them to an invite-only group of influencers you plan to partner with so they can create those networks and social connections there. You can provide them with an exclusive look of your office, your current projects. You can offer special benefits, branded swag. You could schedule a social media takeover where they can broadcast to their networks. There are so many different ways that you can build up those relationships. And the best part about these examples is that anyone can connect with supporters and donors on a live stream, and getting started is so easy. You can actually embed live stream directly into your Classy campaign in minutes, so there's really no reason not to add this dynamic element into your fundraising efforts in 2021. And on the topic of embedding live streaming and videos on the Classy platform, like I said, it's so simple. I wanted to share an example from one of our recent partners' fundraising campaigns. So we have a couple of screenshots from our partner Oregon Cancer Foundation's recent fundraising page. They held a virtual breakfast fundraiser and utilized both live stream and recorded videos on their campaign page to engage with potential donors in real time and speak directly to their audience, like I said, just reaching across the screen. So this helped create that atmosphere of an in-person event while on a virtual scale. So to wrap things up with this section on how to engage donors where they're at, My next slide is going to walk us through 3 main ways that you can incorporate live streaming into your fundraising strategy. All right, so here we go. Live streaming occurs on 3 different levels for your nonprofit. So let's dive into each of those. The first is going to be at that organizational level. And that means that your nonprofit and staff are the ones doing or hosting the live stream. The live video is broadcast over your nonprofit social media accounts, and it can be fully branded as your event. It can also be a part of your regularly scheduled marketing strategy. So I had an example come to mind I wanted to share from past experience at a nonprofit I used to work at. You can actually use social media, maybe your coordinator, somebody who is your handles your social media, to set up a go live every other Thursday for a behind the scenes update on what your nonprofit is working on and how donations will be put to use. It's a great way to give your supporters that behind the scenes look, really show impact. The key here is consistency. So set up a regularly scheduled go live event that your supporters can view week over week. And don't be afraid to test out a few different approaches or times to see what works best for your audience. The next level is going to be at the influencer level, and that involves partnering with an influencer or notable public figure with a large social media following to do a live stream on your nonprofit's behalf. And that's similar to that Dr. Lupo example we just looked at. So while influencers may use the material you've previously provided them with, the live event ultimately takes place on their own accounts, leveraging their personal brand to connect followers with your mission. And I'm going to go back to that Dr. Lupo example because we saw how his 3.2 million followers translated to 3 million raised for the organization. So this can be a really powerful way to engage with a new audience. And lastly, you can live stream at the peer-to-peer level. And this is where you enhance your campaigns by adding an engaging way for fundraisers to share their fundraising goals with their communities and solicit donations on your behalf. These live streamers can make donation appeals to their own personal networks over the broadcast while engaging with potential donors in real time and speaking directly to their audience about why your nonprofit's mission matters so much to them. And it really puts into play the whole principle and foundation of peer-to-peer fundraising, which is that people give to people. So allowing your fundraisers to engage with their own social networks is going to bring more donors and donations back to your organization. And with that, it has been so great walking through these 2 sections with you. I'm going to pass it over here to my colleague Elizabeth, who's going to walk through the massive importance of recurring giving.
Thank you, Carly. Loved everything you just walked us through. But now we'll kind of switch gears and we're going to dive into one of my favorite topics, which is recurring giving. And I'll belabor this a little bit, hopefully not too much, but I think if we learned anything this past year, it's that, the COVID-19 pandemic has really continued to kind of accelerate the shift to online giving, and many organizations are really quickly realizing the long-term benefits of cultivating an online recurring giving program. So in this section, we're going to dive into why recurring giving is more important now than ever before. We're going to share some campaign examples with you all and then follow up with some best practices and things that you can do at your organization to put some of the things we talk about into motion. To kick things off and to ground us, I want to start by discussing the value of a recurring donor and what prioritizing recurring donors can actually mean for your business. And I want to contextualize that with some data and share some data that we have from the Classy fundraising platform. And the first data point that I want to share is that the average one-time gift is $120. Whereas on the flip side, the average recurring donation is actually $38 per month or $494 annually, excuse me. And that is actually 5 times the value of a one-time donation. So while at first glance, $38, it may not seem as exciting as a $120 one-time donation, these small one-time gifts really add up. And most importantly, it's revenue that your organization can really count on throughout the year. And the value of recurring giving does not stop there. In fact, in Classy's 2019 annual fundraising report, The State of Modern Philanthropy, we found that one-time donors who converted into recurring donors were much more likely to come back and make another one-time gift on top of their recurring gift. This means that recurring donors within a year of signing up as a recurring donor were coming back and making an additional gift within 1 year of that first donation. And this is pretty significant to me because oftentimes we hear that nonprofits are fearful to ask their recurring donor base for additional support, when in fact this data kind of reinforces that they shouldn't be. These recurring donors and supporters are kind of really eager to support your mission throughout the year. And there is one other kind of data point that I want to dive into before we'll start talking about, how recurring giving allows you to build a community, if you will, with your supporters. And that data point is also from the State of Modern Philanthropy, and it revealed that organizations who raise over 50 million in total revenue had a healthy 26% of their online revenue coming from recurring gifts. Why is this important? So I think this is a question I would ask of everyone on the webinar today. How impactful would it have been if 26% of your online revenue was coming from recurring donations this past year? I think it would be pretty significant. One of the biggest challenges we faced this past year was, having major events kind of pulled off the calendar, having to shift and kind of adapt kind of to the new world in which we had to adapt to. There are many organizations that lost major gifts, which forced them to lay off members of their staff and scale back investment in key programs. I also know there are organizations that had to cancel fundraising events, which typically drive the lion's share of their annual revenue. And we learned that things can really change in a moment's notice, and this is what really makes having a reliable, consistent revenue source so important for your organization. It can help you kind of weather the storm, if you will. And there's another story, another anecdote I want to share before we start talking about the community aspect of recurring giving, and that's, many organizations experienced a lot of hardship this past year. They had to cancel events and other things, but there were also organizations like food banks that actually saw a surge of support through one-time donations because there was a lot of need. Food banks, the support that they were giving to their community was so critical as we kind of were faced with the economic crisis of the pandemic. And so they saw a surge of support. And one of the challenges that they're actually faced with right now is how do they go back and re-engage and retain these one-time donors that came through their doors in 2020. And recurring giving is just one example of how you can kind of go back and engage your one-time supporters, ask them to make more of an ongoing commitment. And then that kind of leads into, the last thing I want to touch on here is the sense of community that recurring giving kind of allows nonprofits to cultivate with their supporters. Recurring donors really do feel like they are connected to the impact of an organization and an active participant in that movement or change. So, regardless of where you stand when it comes to retaining supporters, I think the universal starting point is really making retention a primary focus of your development team. And recurring giving is one of the best retention tactics that you can tap into in 2021. And the sooner that you can make this commitment, the sooner you're really going to be able to reap the rewards of building a more sustainable community of support. So with that, let's go through a few examples and share with you how organizations are doing this today. This is a great example and story that really underscores the importance of investing time into a recurring giving campaign and really the quick impact that it can have on an organization. This is the Friedreich's Ataxia Research Alliance. They're a nonprofit that is focused on supporting research, public awareness, and community collaboration to find the cure for Friedreich's ataxia, which is a debilitating degenerative neuromuscular disorder. And they were really looking for a way to encourage monthly recurring giving that wouldn't require a significant amount of time for their staff to manage on an ongoing basis. On their previous platform, before they kind of joined the Classy community, they had a donation form. They offered a box that donors could check to become recurring donors, but they did not have the ability to make a specific ask for that type of giving. And in August of 2020, this past year, they began their migration to Classy, and they actually launched a campaign to specifically target monthly recurring giving and really just promote that type of gift. It was a 6-week-long effort, and they promoted it through their social media channels, and they branded the campaign as the Pathway, explaining that when you join the Pathway with a monthly donation of $10 or more, you are joining a community that is invested in setting a path to treatments and a cure for this disease through research. I love all of that. The Pathway, right? It really does kind of define this sense of community, and it allows you to kind of talk to your recurring supporters in a really unique way. It makes them feel like they're joining a movement, if you will. And I think, the proof is in the pudding, if you will. Within the campaign's first 3 months, they more than doubled their number of monthly donors to 55 total. And this resulted in about an additional $1,000 per month in monthly donations since launching the campaign, or around $3,050 total each month. And that's just looking at the success at, within a given month. Annualize that for the year, that is a big impact. And they also continue to kind of play up that sense of community with the supporters of the Pathway. They send those supporters a dedicated outreach for becoming a monthly donor. They're sent a welcome packet with an FARA branded decal, an awareness bracelet, and information about their research. These donors also receive a quarterly e-newsletter and opportunities to engage with the nonprofits community throughout the year. And again, all of this information really just aims to show the donor exactly what their monthly giving is allowing the nonprofit to achieve. And one additional thing I did want to call out about this campaign is that they actually gave their recurring donors the option to cover their own credit card processing fees, which 92% of their recurring donors chose to do. And over just a 3-month period, this opt-in feature saved them $850 in processing fees, which is fantastic. That's more money back to the organization, more money back to research. And looking ahead, one of the things I love about this is they're planning to remind their supporters about this recurring giving campaign once per month through their newsletter and social media channels, and then they'll do another larger promotion again next year. So this campaign is still live. I'd encourage you guys to all go to their website and check it out. There's a lot of things to learn from this campaign, and I love that they're kind of slow dripping this to their donors throughout the year, and then they'll do another big push in 2021. All right, so we've talked about why recurring giving is so important. We just shared that great example from the Friedreich's Ataxia Research Alliance. So now we're going to talk about a few best practices that you can apply to your recurring giving campaign or your donation page. So our first best practice, it really is to launch kind of a full-fledged recurring giving effort, if you will, and have a dedicated recurring giving campaign. And both of these screenshots here, they actually come from dedicated recurring giving campaign efforts. And these are impact blocks. They do in the first one here, they do a fantastic job of kind of connecting that monthly gift to the impact of that donation will have in a given month throughout the year. In this first example here, it actually comes from the Milagro House. They're an organization that provides education, housing, and support services for women and children who would otherwise be experiencing homelessness. And again, these impact blocks really beautifully illustrate the impact a monthly donation will have. And if you're fundraising on a tool like Classy, I think what's great is you can carry through those suggested donation amounts through to your donation form. So if you go and click donate and then land on that donation form, you can still see those suggested monthly gift amounts. And I think that does a great way of kind of like pulling through the donation appeal kind of through the entire giving process. And it allows, your supporters to kind of keep that top of mind as they're getting ready to make that gift. In the second example here, it comes from Love 146. They're an organization that's dedicated to stopping and preventing future child trafficking. If you are a marketing nerd like I am, they are a really, really creative organization, which I think you can all see here. They got creative with their impact blocks by illustrating the simple swap that you could make each month to create a lasting impact. So for me, I'm a big LaCroix fan. It would be hard for me to imagine not ever having LaCroix, but this really does make me kind of press pause and think about how I could cut back on something I don't really need and then put those dollars towards a good cause. I also really love that their recommended donation amounts aren't over $10 a month, which makes this a very kind of accessible campaign. It makes it easy to get involved. And, as I was talking about earlier, the small one-time gifts, they may not seem as exciting or sexy, but they really do add up over time. And I just love that this gives, supporters, all supporters, a way to get involved and kind of support their cause. So again, these are both impact blocks taken from a dedicated recurring giving campaign. But if you're not ready to launch a dedicated recurring giving campaign, you can just give your donors the option to make a monthly recurring donation on your general donation form. I think that you all would be, if you're not already doing this, and if you add this to your donation form, I think you'll be pleasantly surprised to see that you'll start to have some recurring donors come through. And I think giving your supporters the option to give monthly is better than not giving them the option at all. So that is something that we would recommend you would do if you're not already doing. And before we move on, I did want to call out the two ways in which technology can make it easier to manage a recurring giving program. If you think back to the example that we just shared from Frederick's Ataxia, having a recurring giving program that was easy to manage was very important for that organization. So I want to kind of share some of the ways in which technology can make managing this type of campaign easier. And I'll caveat that these are Classy specific recurring giving tools, but there are other recurring giving resources and tools out there that your nonprofit can kind of leverage and tap into. So the first kind of quick plug I want to make is that on Classy Manager, you can really easily manage your recurring giving data. You can track progress with real-time reports that gives you insights into your recurring donors, and then you have also tools to manage their gifts. You can also leverage our recommended reports to help you identify the best candidates to become monthly donors and then ones to re-engage. So if you're thinking of launching a recurring giving campaign, you can leverage those types of reports to better understand who you should be targeting. The other kind of call out I want to make is that with Classy Pay, our payment processor, you can actually reduce recurring donor churn with our automatic credit card updater. So instead of having to run reports, track when a recurring donor's credit card is about to expire, Classy Pay's automatic credit card updater kind of works behind the scenes with card networks to update payment details when a card expires or is lost or stolen. And this allows your supporters to continue supporting your cause without interruption, and then your team can actually focus on other key areas of your programming. So I think that that's a really kind of instrumental, empowering tool for organizations reducing recurring donor churn. Okay. So this is our free resource we're going to be sharing with all of you today, a nonprofit's guide to recurring giving. It does a great job of breaking down how to plan, brand, and promote your monthly giving program. We're going to share this out in the follow-up email after the webinar, but encourage all of you guys to check it out. Take a look. It's got some great resources and best practices in there for you all. Okay, so our kind of last section of the webinar that we're going to dig in today is we're going to discuss how to remain nimble in times of uncertainty. Again, 2020, we learned that things can change at a drop of a dime. So whether you're kind of pivoting to raise funds in the face of adversity, or if you're really shifting your strategy to our now mostly online world, you need to continue to diversify your fundraising efforts to really stay resilient. So right now we're going to dive into some best practices for how to develop a diverse fundraising strategy so your organization can feel well equipped to handle whatever this new year brings us. We all know it's very strategic and advantageous to have a diverse fundraising strategy. I think it's evident that this ensures healthy donation volume throughout the year. So is your fundraising strategy as robust as it could be? And on this slide here, we actually have a few thought starters to kind of get your the wheels turning, if you will. So if your fundraising is all events based, you might want to consider adding an annual crowdfunding campaign around Giving Tuesday. Or if you're really heavily reliant on website donations, you also might want to consider making a small bet on peer-to-peer fundraising, or maybe even launch a recurring giving campaign targeting past one-time donors. These are, just two examples of small changes that your organization could do to ensure, a more foolproof fundraising strategy. And a good exercise that I would recommend, whether it's for your development team, fundraising team, marketing team, or your entire staff, is to really do an annual planning deep dive. And this is something I do with my team here at Classy, but you always start by taking stock, if you will, mapping out your annual fundraising calendar, listing out all the ways in which you plan to engage your donor base in 2021. And then from there, start to call out some of the gaps, or perhaps when you anticipate seeing a drop in donation. And then once you're able to really identify what you're not doing, and when you kind of have gaps in your calendar, you can start to test out new fundraising campaigns, or find periods of time in which you can double down on efforts that have really worked well in the past. I'm thinking back to that example from the Friedreich's Ataxia Research Alliance. They're slow dripping their recurring giving program throughout the year, but then they're also carving out dedicated periods of time where they're doing a push towards that campaign. The annual planning process really does allow you to kind of figure out when you have space and capacity to double down on existing programs, or to introduce new fundraising campaigns. So if that's an exercise that you haven't done yet, I would highly recommend doing that with your team. And again, if this year showed us anything, it's that diversifying your fundraising strategy has never been more important. And in many cases, it was really the difference between an organization thriving through this past year's crisis or shutting its doors. So we don't know what's in store for 2021, but we know that staying nimble is now a strategic imperative. And for those of you that are nervous, or maybe you're hesitant around adding additional campaigns or donation appeals throughout the year, the data here from the State of Modern Philanthropy really does reveal that donors typically return to take a second action within the same year. So a few data points for you all. Donors who first contribute to a crowdfunding campaign will likely give again within 189 days. It's 184 days after for those who've engaged with a donation page, 192 days after engaging with a peer-to-peer campaign, and 185 days after engaging with an event. I think that this does a great job and reinforces that your supporters are likely to come back around and give again within a year, and therefore you need to ensure that you have outreach and kind of strategy in place to engage them multiple times throughout the year. And something to keep in mind that I think is important, I'm not kind of recommending that you just kind of find your gaps in the calendar and throw spaghetti at the wall, if you will. You do really want to take time to think through how you can connect your fundraising tactics throughout the year. And if you think about this, a lot of it goes back to your donor base and how you're targeting and then segmenting out your appeals. So 2 examples that kind of speak to this. Maybe you hosted a virtual event in the fall of 2020, and then you want to re-engage with these attendees and share with them, an update of your impact year to date, and potentially invite them to fundraise on your behalf or participate in an upcoming campaign. For this specific audience, you really want to acknowledge how they engaged with your organization in the past year, engaging with that event, and you want to make your appeal more personal. And I think when you do that, you'll be really surprised to see your donors are more likely to respond and take action. It kind of also creates this story arc, if you will, or kind of you're creating a journey that you're taking your supporters on throughout the year. Another example of this around how to kind of connect your fundraising efforts, maybe you want to invite your recurring donor base to make a one-time contribution or to give to your Giving Tuesday campaign. This is really timely, and a recent example, my husband and I, we support a few organizations on a monthly recurring basis, and in this past giving season in December, we actually received 2 or 3 appeals to make a one-time contribution that went towards these organizations' year-end campaign efforts. And what I loved about those appeals is that they recognized the support that we had given that organization throughout the year. They talked about our impact year to date, and then they invited us to make an additional one-time gift and really clearly articulated what the impact of that additional gift was going to have. So again, this speaks to kind of how you're segmenting your donor base, how you're personalizing your donation appeals, and really taking your supporters on a journey with you throughout the year. So I think if I can drive home one point, it is to really be cognizant and aware of the ways in which you're engaging your donors throughout the year. And when the opportunities present themselves, connect those appeals and take your supporters on a journey with you. I think they'll be excited to go on that journey with you and eager to support you, maybe more than they're already doing so today. All right, and one of our last examples that we have to share with you all this morning is Hope for Haiti's Hike for Haiti Challenge. I think something that is unique about this campaign that I want to call out is that Hike for Haiti has actually always been virtual. This campaign honors the students, teachers, and families who have to climb 200 flights of stairs every day in Haiti in order to access clean water, healthcare, and education. And when the pandemic happened, their team was initially on the fence about whether or not they were going to host this event in 2020. It was in April and May, so shortly after kind of the lockdowns had been put into place. But ultimately, after some internal conversations, Hope for Haiti saw this as an opportunity to market the event as a way to drive community togetherness during social distancing. And what's fantastic about this is that anyone can make the climb, or if you don't have access to stairs or elevated trails, you can actually walk 10.5 miles. So it's accessible to all to participate. And I love this campaign for a few reasons. I think the first is that it runs for a month, which gives participants the flexibility to do the climb in a time that really works best for them. And while it's not a large in-person event, there is still a registration element to the campaign. So you can register as an individual, or you can join a team with your coworkers, family, or friends. I feel like that registration element, makes it feel more official, if you will, more like, an in-person event that you would attend. And the other great thing about this is, it's only $30 to participate, but if you don't want to make that contribution up front, you can actually fundraise to cover the costs. So upon registration, Hope for Haiti sends their registrants an email with instructions on how to set up their peer-to-peer campaign. And you can actually, and once you kind of like set up that campaign, you're then all kind of set to fundraise to cover that $30. If you don't go through and fundraise that $30, you're actually still charged on your credit card $30. So in the registration process, it's very clear they have fundraising commitments where you're committing to fundraise for that $30. And if you're not hitting that commitment, the organization then goes and charges that $30 on a set date. So Hope for Haiti doesn't have to worry about potentially losing out on those funds if people don't go through the process and create their peer-to-peer page. And I also think that it kind of lights a little bit of a fire underneath your fundraisers. It ensures that they're going to actually go through, take the time, create that fundraising page and engage with their supporters. So I encourage all of you to check out this campaign. They actually just launched the Hike for Haiti Challenge in 2021. I personally am registered. I'm really excited about this, and I think that they've just done a great job in the ways in which they've structured and even market this campaign. So I'd encourage all of you all to check it out. All right, so to close us out today, we've got one final resource that we want to share with all of you here. Again, we're going to be sharing these resources in our follow-up today, but this blog post, it does talk about Classy campaign types, but I'll caveat that you don't have to use Classy to launch a crowdfunding, peer-to-peer, recurring giving campaign. The list goes on. This blog is just a great resource because it does a good job of breaking down how nonprofits can leverage these different campaign types to engage their donor base. So while you're mapping out your 2021 fundraising calendar, doing some planning for the year, you see a gap or you want to test something new, you can leverage this resource to figure out what maybe the next campaign is that you'd like to test or kind of launch. So with that, we'll kind of dive into questions. I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. We love having the opportunity of working with Candid and talking about some of the things that we often talk about across our internal team. So thank you for joining us. And if you have any questions, don't be shy. We're eager to kind of dive in and answer all of the questions we receive.
Great. Well, firstly, thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Carly. We are definitely getting tons of questions coming in, but I definitely appreciate your time and just breaking everything down. I think always looking at examples of how these things have been done can help folks kind of start seeing whether or not it's something that's a fit for their organization as well. So thank you for walking us through everything. Do know you can still continue submitting your questions for our Q&A. We will do our best to get to as many of them as possible. But to kick us off, I have a question here from Erin. And I think it's a common question that I've heard these last few months. So hopefully you guys are able to field it. Erin shares, one of our senior managers is hesitant to do much asking for donations from individuals during this time, citing that individuals are struggling financially or too stressed, and she doesn't want to bother them. would you agree is the first part of the question. And the second is, how should we adjust what we do to be sensitive to the challenges of this pandemic?
It's a great question. Carly, do you want me to jump in first? I can kind of take a first pass.
Yeah, go for it. Take a swing, and then I'm happy to follow up. That's a great question, Erin.
Yeah, I think I would say, you know, I still believe that you need to be asking your donors for support. I think if you're not asking, you're leaving potential donations on the table. And I think some of those data points that we shared, you know, while they were from years prior, I do believe that supporters are kind of eager to come back and take action and support causes that are near and dear to them, even during times of crises. And I think a lot of it comes back to messaging, right? I think that you can really finesse the way in which you communicate and you ask your supporters to give back, even acknowledging kind of the stressful context of the world that we're all in right now. I've received donation appeals, you know, that directly acknowledge all of, you know, the things that have happened this past year. And then they do a great job of then talking about, you know, how their mission, like, they've not pressed pause on their mission and there's still a lot of work to do, and they need the support of their community to kind of get through this time and ensure that they're able to, you know, deliver upon their mission and give back to their constituents. So I think that a lot of it comes back to kind of how you message and frame the donation appeal. And then also, you know, you'll just want to be sure that you're kind of spacing out time in between the appeals that you are sending out. And then perhaps, you know, there is a cohort of donors you can kind of look and segment your donor database. If you have some, you know, high net worth individuals that are likely to give a little bit more substantial one-time gifts, you know, maybe those are the folks that you want to prioritize reaching out to first. And then for, you know, your other cohort of supporters that have maybe given, you know, smaller one-time contributions, the donation appeal to those supporters may be smaller. I think we talked a lot in this webinar about how small one-time or small recurring gifts, they add up and they have an impact over time, and it kind of lowers the barrier of entry, if you will. So $5 a month, that, you know, is pretty accessible for some folks. And I just, again, I think it goes back to kind of how you're segmenting your donor base and then kind of crafting communications. But I would not recommend pressing pause on outreach right now. I think that, you know, if we've learned anything through the Classy community, it's that the supporters of the organizations that fundraise with us are kind of eager and willing to give back. So I wouldn't press pause on appeals. But Carly, I know you likely have a lot of thoughts and feedback to add, so I'll pass it over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. And honestly, you covered a lot of the grounds that I was going to. I think you had some great points you hit on there. And a couple of keywords came to mind because I think this is a great question, especially in a year like this, to consider how can we maintain good donor relationships? How much is too much to be asking? Should we be asking? Those are all things that I think most of us have thought. And a couple of those keywords that came to mind for me were empathy, transparency, and strategy. I think this is a year where beyond the social sector, if whatever line of business you're in, we've really had to pay attention to how we're being empathetic to our constituents, and from the social sector, the donors that we're asking for contributions from. I definitely agree with Elizabeth. I don't think this is ever a time to press pause, because what we've seen through this last year is people are able and willing to step up. There are your donors within your donor base who are willing and able and want to help to continue support whatever your mission and your work is. The key part here when I talk about that keyword of strategy, to Elizabeth's point, is maybe being a little bit more strategic, diving into donor data, identifying your high yield wealth individuals versus some of those who may be more small gift oriented, and creating segmented campaigns and asks and appeals that really cater to those audiences in different manners, asking for different amounts, asking for monthly gifts versus one-time large gifts. So I would say my full answer to that is it's definitely not a time to press pause. It's just a time to be a bit more transparent and empathetic with what everyone's experiencing while still being strategic in your outreach. So hopefully that gives you at least a little bit of guidance and insight from our end here.
Thank you so much. I think that's definitely paints a good picture. You know, not all donors are in the same place, so let's speak to them slightly differently. And I think segmenting is definitely a great way to approach that. The next question that I have here comes from Anne, and Anne is asking, how can we engage or partner with sponsors without the usual draws of an in-person event, i.e. networking opportunities and the benefits of being in person at a gala? So any recommendations on engaging with sponsors?
Elizabeth, do you want me to take this one first? We can flip-flop here.
Yeah, that works.
Awesome, sounds great. And that's another great question to be asking. So I think earlier in the presentation, I talked about just modifying and shifting the ways that we think about like how we do in-person events versus virtual events. And I think sponsorships is a prime example here of, yes, there is that sense of, oh no, we're losing the benefit of having the networking in person with people on the ground during a gala. But perhaps the shift is when you move it to a virtual event space, there's more benefit of broadcasting your sponsor's name to a wider audience, because now we're not just talking about the 100 people at the gala, we're talking about potentially thousands, tens of thousands of people that your campaign is reaching with their sponsorship name attached. So being able to really provide that perspective of a wider audience that you might be reaching, that could be a really great benefit for whoever your sponsors are. And it's actually something I had a conversation with a nonprofit about earlier in the fall when they were adjusting their sponsorship opportunities and recognizing the reach that they were going to be able to provide sponsors with as the benefit of contributing for whatever that event was. So I think that would be one of the key things I'd focus on, is being able to broaden the reach and the audience that sponsors now have access and FaceTime to via your virtual campaign. And Elizabeth, I'm not sure if you have another idea to chip in there.
Yeah, I mean, this would kind of depend upon, the type of virtual campaign that you're hosting, but we have seen some creative ways in which, people are kind of cultivating these breakout sessions, if you will, or kind of like one-off opportunities within a virtual setting to engage with sponsors and kind of network with the attendees and kind of get to know them on a more one-on-one basis. So I also think that that's something else that you can explore. I've seen people do that. It gives, again, your sponsors some face time with your attendees and the opportunity to network and engage with them. And then I think if you're kind of connecting things to our digital landscape and the marketing front, there is also a ton of kind of like co-marketing activities that you could do in partnership with a sponsor that you can offer, and whether that's featuring their logo or content from the sponsor within your email, whatever it may be. I do think that there are some just like creative opportunities that your sponsors can find value in that can kind of augment what they were once receiving at that in-person event.
Next question comes from Molly. And Molly is asking, are you seeing any trends in virtual fundraiser fatigue among supporters? Anecdotally, it seemed that early virtual fundraisers had the benefit of novelty, but has that worn throughout 2020 and now early 2021? Carly, I'll send this one over to you.
Sure, thanks for teeing me up there, appreciate it. And Molly, this is a great question. I wonder Elizabeth might have some more statistic background on this, just coming from her position. But what I would say is it has been a 1 year of experiencing this. I think that different nonprofits have launched their virtual events throughout the year, so they're targeting their own internal audiences. And I wouldn't say, at least anecdotally from conversations I have with nonprofits, that they're seeing fatigue, because keep in mind that we're not in a space where people are able to participate in the in-person events realm. So we're having to adjust our mindset, even just as individual participants and donors. And with that comes this realization that if this is how I'm going to participate to a nonprofit I care about, then this is how I'm going to choose to give at this time. Whether or not that's going to be something that continues on through this next year, if we start to experience some more fatigue, we'll probably have more data on that as time goes on. But Elizabeth, I'm not sure if you have anything to add in more statistically from that.
I don't have any like exact statistics to draw from. I can kind of share some anecdotes from recent conversations. No, I don't see fatigue happening yet. If anything, I would anticipate that almost all events within 2021 are virtual. And then even looking at beyond 2021, I think most events are going to continue to have a virtual element, right? I think if we've learned anything, it's that the virtual component really expands the reach of an event, and it makes it much more accessible to a wide variety of people. So I think that that is fantastic. It's one of the reasons why the collaborative is virtual again in 2021, and we're committed to having a virtual aspect to that event moving forward. So I don't think that we're going to see any fatigue. I would say, you know, it does put a little bit of pressure on you to ensure that you're being creative and that there's some, you know, kind of fun delights within the experience, you know, leveraging live streaming and other tools like that, I think is, you know, going to be imperative. And then being really intentional about kind of like your messaging and how you're building up and kind of building excitement for the event. I think that that is going to be critical, because I think in some extent, yeah, you know, I'd say the Zoom fatigue is real and some of that novelty is worn off, but I don't think that virtual events are going anywhere. I think it just puts a little bit more pressure on the organization to really think strategically around how you're positioning, marketing the event, you know, what are some elements that you're doing to kind of delight and surprise your donors. I think that that will be more critical. But again, I don't see kind of like the virtual event trend slowing down, if you will. I think it's something that is going to be here to stay for quite some time.
Thank you both for fielding that question as well. Lauren is sharing that they love all the suggestions from today, but it is starting to feel a little overwhelming for a one-person marketing social media / development team, which I'm sure feels like something that a majority of our audience is experiencing. So of all the trends that we've talked about today, you know, how should an organization prioritize what's perhaps the best fit for them, or how should they tackle them?
I would kind of, Carly, you can jump in and I'll take a stab at this first. I would recommend first, you know, going through the planning process for the year. I think that that's really critical. You need to be very kind of honest and upfront of, you know, what are the things that you do every single year that are not going away, that you have to dedicate your resources and time to, and then identifying when you have space to maybe test some new ideas or kind of, you know, tackle some low-hanging fruit. So I'd recommend starting there. And then I think it kind of depends on your organization. So if you're looking at your calendar, and a lot of the, you know, the efforts that you kind of push out throughout the year are really geared towards generating one-time donations, and you've got a, you know, a decent size of one-time donors that you can kind of tap into, I would maybe recommend launching a recurring giving program, or kind of, you know, asking those one-time donors to become recurring donors. Or kind of then on the flip side, if your organization has really, you know, thrived with events, I think Hike for Haiti or Hope for Haiti, they're not a huge organization, and I don't think that they have a ton of people on their development team by any means, and they've been able to kind of cultivate this really successful virtual experience there that they are committed to kind of like expanding and growing year over year. So if you have an event, or, you know, maybe you're thinking of doing an event or an element that you use to kind of engage your supporters in person, I would kind of then maybe prioritize thinking through how you translate that into a virtual format, and then what you do to engage your supporters with that event throughout the year. So that's kind of how I don't think that there's a one size fits all approach in terms of what you should do if you're kind of a lean team, but I would be very realistic in the planning process around, you know, what are the things you know you have to do, identifying when you have space, and then developing a plan that you can kind of execute on throughout the entire year that keeps your team focused. And again, you know, focus your efforts on the things that are likely going to have the highest return versus trying to do it all. And then, you know, over time, if your team grows, and then if some things kind of are able to run on autopilot, if you will, you can then start to layer on additional tactics or additional appeals, whatever it may be. So that's kind of how I would approach things, but I'll pass it over to Carly. She'll probably have some wise nuggets to add to what I just shared.
Yes, thanks, Elizabeth. I always have the wise nuggets here. So I think Lauren was the name of the person who asked this question, and it's a great question to ask. It sounds like you're wearing a lot of hats. I think that's a feeling that a lot of people are familiar with. I'll include myself in that. I'm often wearing a lot of hats, and all of my work responsibilities. And I was going to mention exactly what Elizabeth said, which was, I think it really just starts with evaluating your own annual strategy and recognizing the low-hanging fruit. One thing that comes to mind, which is more of a, what do I want to say here? Could be a little bit less time consuming than maybe trying to tackle a full virtual event launch, could be really evaluating your recurring giving campaign and diving into your own donor data to recognize who are those potential donors who have given once every year for the past couple of years, or who we recognize could be interested in transitioning to more of a recurring giving setting, and starting to build outreach and campaign, or outreach and a campaign around that. To get in front of those donors. And what you'll be doing is building out your sustainable revenue stream. And on top of that, now freeing up some time to potentially explore avenues of opportunity like virtual events, maybe identifying a top influencer within your own network that you can partner with. So I know there's a lot of suggestions that we provided here today, and hopefully you were able to get a good running list going. And as you're planning your annual strategy, really think about where are our areas of opportunity that are low hanging, not going to take up all of our time, that we can start with, and then we'll start to adjust. But if I were to plug anything, recurring giving for me is one strategy I think that every nonprofit should absolutely be exploring.
Absolutely. I appreciate that perspective, Carly and Elizabeth. What is that low hanging fruit? And, recurring giving is something that, we're all thinking about, whether or not we're all at home or not. So I think that's definitely a place where folks can focus. I think Jose's question brings up a really great dynamic. Virtual events and doing things digitally has definitely made it possible for our events and fundraisers to reach a wider net. But when it comes to accessibility, we are, not necessarily able to reach our entire audience. So Jose shares, I work with communities with various disabilities who are unable to access and engage in virtual events due to the situation. How do we re-engage these individuals who are no longer able to benefit from on-site personal touch experiences? Is this something that Classy has had to encounter, and any recommendations perhaps you've given some of your clients?
Yeah, I can start us off here, Elizabeth, if that helps. And Jose, that's another great question to be asking. I know that's a conversation that we've had with different nonprofits who are also recognizing that in-person events were more accessible to some attendees who may not have the technology or ability to access more virtual campaigns. So it's a great question. I'm trying to think of the best way to answer this. I think it would just be trying to communicate out with that audience as best as you can from whatever their accessibility points could be. And then once, we start to be able to introduce in-person events again, we can have this sort of interwoven strategy of full accessibility for people who need to be present in person versus those who can access through technology, virtual setting, and whatever those adaptive tools are. So as far as accessibility with current campaigns you have up and running in virtual events, I think there are some platforms that can certainly cater to the different accessibility needs and technology. And Elizabeth, I'm going to pass it over to you to see if you have any thoughts on that.
No, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. I wish I had kind of a running list that I could pull from for some of those tools and resources, but that's potentially something that we can kind of go back and do some additional due diligence and research on our team and share that with you, Jose, because I think it's a fantastic question and would love to kind of support and partner with you more there.
Absolutely. And to underline that, I know I've had conversations about screen readers and accessibility on that end. So it's certainly something that's top of mind for our team, and I would assume for many other platforms in a similar space. So as Elizabeth mentioned, Jose, I think that's a great question. Would love that as a takeaway. And we're certainly open to figuring out greater ways to make sure you can reach your full audience without any sort of technological issues happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say that is something that we here at Candid have been listening to as well. And I think for us, it's really been listening to our audience. When Candid has come short, it's been listening and adapting because at the end of the day, it's our audience that could also help us learn best in terms of what their needs are and how we can meet them. So I would say just open up the conversation with your audience would be a recommendation that I would put out there as well. Shifting to our next question that comes in from Angela. Angela actually already has a live streaming community and finds that many times connecting with influencers is not that easy. And particularly, it's because many of these influencers already get so many requests to participate in things. So any recommendations you have either on how to stand out with your request or how to perhaps target your influencers a bit more efficiently?
Yeah, I'll start off with this one because I know it was in the section I covered. Angela, that's another great question. And there are a few blog resources that I believe have already been sent out in the chat and definitely will be sent out after this presentation. I think that the key thing to think in mind here is, yes, when we think of influencers, we typically think of those really, really famous, influencers with a huge social network who I'm sure are being hit up every 5 minutes for some sort of sponsorship or partnership opportunity. And I think the key thing to keep in mind is that partnering with an influencer doesn't necessarily mean targeting these really, really, really famous, well-known influencers. You may have people in your own donor network that have a significant following and would make for a great partnership. Now, it's not going to be on the millions of followers level, but it could be, like I mentioned, those 10,000 dedicated followers to, one influencer who is, able to get your word out to that wider audience. And I love the blog articles because it'll walk through a couple of tips on how to engage and get the ear of those people that you want to target for your influence efforts. There's also a second blog which is going to walk through generally just how to leverage your followers as social media influencers. So taking away the ask of a 50,000 person influencer and instead thinking about your entire donor base and how you can leverage all of them with their collective net worth, their collective networks to move forward and reach a new audience. So I'm going to pass you over, Angela, to those different blog articles. So I think it'll help you really walk through a couple of those key pieces. And Elizabeth, any thoughts from your end?
No, I think you really covered it all. I think the only other recommendation that I would have, just kind of as a marketer, is kind of get ahead of the asks, if you will, to the extent that you can kind of reach out to some of your influencers and try to secure them several months in advance. I feel like that's something that's always successful or kind of leads to success, if you will, versus kind of avoiding some of those last minute kind of appeals or requests to your influencers. That's actually something that we're very strategic about with our team here, because we recognize, people get booked up, calendars get really busy. So to the extent you can kind of like think farther out in the future and start talking with those people farther in advance, I think that also kind of helps ensure that you get on their radar and you're able to secure their support. So that would be really the only thing that I would add to what Carly just shared.
Thank you both. Our next question here comes from Megan Drew, and Megan Drew is asking, in your recommendation for live video, do you find that people connect with people, or are infographic videos also a great way to make a connection?
I can share some insights from like a digital marketing perspective and what we've seen with some of our paid media and kind of insights and learnings there. We have seen that people connect with people. I feel like, that's some advice that we work with a digital marketing agency, and some of the assets and resources that we've created from a video perspective on our end, we've focused more so on kind of having a human element to it. That being said, I think you can kind of marry the two, if you will. I think that if you have the resources to kind of do the editing or kind of share statistics while also then having someone kind of speak to them, I think that is also really effective and powerful. Something that we've seen work well, at least within the digital kind of paid ad landscape. So I do think that the human element appeals to a wider audience. But that being said, I feel like people also really gravitate towards some of the data and nuggets that can be shared within an infographic. So to the extent that you can kind of marry the two or kind of have a person breaking down some of those elements, I think that is an effective tactic as well. Carly, you have anything you'd kind of add to that?
I think that was perfect. And I think with your expertise in your position and working with our digital marketing company, that would be exactly what I would have said. So you said it all.
Sorry.
Well, thank you, Carly and Elizabeth. We do still have plenty of questions to go through, but I just wanted to pause and say thank you. I think you guys are teaming up on these quite well, and I appreciate your insights. Our next question here is coming from Jerry. Jerry wants to know, how is a monthly giving program different, or how does it compare to a membership program with benefits like a newsletter or free admission?
I would say I think that they can kind of be the same, if you will. I think the successful recurring giving programs that we've, seen and kind of spoke to today are really kind of structured a little bit as kind of like a subscription type model or program, really community. I think back to the pathway that you're joining, and it's very clear that you're kind of like part of that community. You get dedicated communications, you get some swag, if you will. You feel like you're kind of embedded with that organization and that they're taking you on a journey with you. So I would actually say, you don't need to think of a recurring giving campaign as, separate of a, subscription campaign, if you will. You can kind of structure your recurring giving program as kind of a subscription type campaign, where you're cultivating this community, inviting people to make a monthly gift, and then making them feel really valued and kind of bought in to what your organization is doing on an ongoing basis. So I don't think that I don't view the two as being completely separate, but I'll let Carly kind of chime in and share her thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. And Jerry, another great question here. So I think again, I'm going to speak anecdotally from other nonprofits that I work with, and also just from my own experience. when I think of the connotations of membership program versus recurring giving, I see the real difference being that with memberships, there's this expectation of return. So, I think of membership programs like being able to attend events, being able to have admittance into things, expecting to have that newsletter like you mentioned, or really just you feel like you are owed something from it, versus the recurring giving program where there's less of an expectation, but as Elizabeth mentioned, it really can mirror a membership experience. And what I mean by that is you can build, and I think it is in your benefit and in your advantage to build out a strong recurring giving program of some sort of like circle of givers or community of givers to make people feel like they are invested in it and a part of a greater community of recurring givers. And that can come with benefits. I know personally for the recurring giving programs I'm in, I'll receive, little trinkets here and there, and end of year summary, annual reports, which I really appreciate, but I'm not going into that relationship expecting that I get anything out of it. So I would say a little bit, I think, to what Elizabeth was alluding to, which was you can make your recurring giving program similar to membership, where it's that subscription in sort of buy-in month over month, but people will have less expectations that you have to deliver things back to them. So yeah, that would be the main difference. And again, why I really, really emphasize recurring giving if it makes sense for your organization.
Wonderful. Thank you both. And I just wanted to say thank you, Yvonne, for helping us out with the chat here and fielding folks' questions as well. The next question that I have is from Catherine. Congratulations, Catherine. She just got her 501c3. So her question is, are there any types of campaigns that you've seen work better for folks that really are in that startup phase?
It's a good question. Carly, I may lean on you a little bit more here. I would recommend starting, obviously you want to make sure you have a strong website presence, and that on your website you are, have very clear call to actions that are driving folks to making a one-time gift. On your donation appeal page, I'd also, definitely introduce at least giving folks the option to make a recurring donation, so they can make a one-time gift or recurring donation kind of after engaging with your website. And I would potentially, I would recommend maybe starting with a crowdfunding campaign. That's just kind of me, but Carly, I'm curious if you have any other thoughts on what you would kind of recommend starting with.
Sure. Well, first of all, congratulations on obtaining that 501c3. Very exciting, and wishing you all the best. So I think there's a lot of ways to tackle this question, and we have a lot of resources on our blog, actually. So if you have the time, I definitely recommending heading over to the Classy blog, because there's a couple of resources on how to really get started and to build your annual strategy, especially when you're in this position of being so fresh and new and really have that great ability to build from the ground up. Foundationally, I would totally agree with Elizabeth. You should absolutely have a donation page with a recurring giving emphasis on your site whenever that's built out, so that people have that option to give right when they're on the site. I think crowdfunding is an easy way to get the word out. So if you take a look at your current network, your supporters, maybe some of those board members and their networks, and set up a sort of microsite campaign with almost a launch to your organization and really get that energy pumping up, can be a really easy way to get in front of your audience and create that emotionally compelling image or that emotionally compelling call to action through a crowdfunding site and solicit or have people donate, which now become your donors. So those are two quick and easy ways to start. I think peer-to-peer fundraising also could certainly be a great way to go. If you have some passionate current supporters, again, I'm going to think about your board members, maybe some volunteers, people who are closely connected to this process you've just gone through of getting set up. Maybe you leverage them as fundraisers within themselves to reach their personal networks. That's typically how I see people get started. So I think there are a lot of great resources out there if you're looking for some guidance, a couple of guides, some blog articles that can certainly get you started. At the very least, donation page with a strong recurring giving focus, I think, is a great place to start.
Wonderful. Thank you both. Our final question for today comes from Renee, and it's actually quite a popular question in the chat. So I thought quite a few of our audience could benefit from it. How do you decide what price points you should select for folks to opt into for recurring monthly donations? Are there any popular price point options, or does this vary from organization to organization?
It's a really good question. I think it does vary from organization to organization. I think what I would do, just kind of like a data-oriented person, I would look at people who have supported your organization through one-time gifts, and I would maybe kind of start to look and, do some analysis on the size of those one-time gifts that those folks are kind of giving back to your organization, and kind of use that to gauge what's kind of an accessible price point, if you will, for entry. And given that it is a one-time gift, you may want to kind of like decrease that value and start to break things up in a kind of more accessible price point on a recurring monthly basis. So again, I would really start by analyzing how your current one-time donors are giving to your organization, what that looks like from a monetary perspective, and then use that to inform, how you want to kind of offer different price points within kind of a range, if you will, for those select supporters. So again, I think that I would start by analyzing the data first, and then use that to kind of inform the price points that I would recommend on a recurring giving program. But I'm sure Carly has some stuff to add.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I think you set the foundation there, which is data analysis to start off with, and understand the giving levels that people are currently comfortable giving at, and starting to inform how you're going to set up those impact amounts, those suggested price points, as you said, moving forward. Also keeping in mind, I just wanted to pull up the average recurring donation that we see is about $38. So that might give you some sort of semblance of across the space, that's the average giving amount. So you might base it around that. I think the real key part to hone in on here is to recognize that you can't just suggest donation amounts. You have to tie impact to each of those individual donation amounts, so that people can actually understand the difference between a $5 monthly gift to even a $10 monthly gift. And when you start to really convey impact to your supporters and donors, that's where you're going to start to see people turning the corner and potentially giving more as a monthly giver, or even choosing to become a monthly giver, because they understand the impact of where their dollars are met. You can also flip that around. I know Elizabeth shared a fun campaign earlier coming from our partner Love 146, where instead of showing impact, they showed what you would give up once a month. So for me, I'm actually a recurring giver for their organization. And for me, I easily said a succulent from Trader Joe's, that's easy for me to give up. It's $5 once a month. We can make that happen. So I think there's some really creative ways to play around with impact, but you have to tie that in. And as far as the actual amounts to set, look at your own data and recognize that on average across the space, an average donation is about $38 per month.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Carly. Thank you, Elizabeth, and the team at Classy for making this webinar possible. Thank you, everyone who's still on the line and attended today's webinar. On behalf of our team here at Candid and our presenters, thank you so much for joining us today. If you did like this webinar, we do hope that you join us again soon. Have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Stay safe.